Hi everyone, it's Bonnie here for Picket Studios. I'm excited to share with you a cute Halloween card featuring some products from the August release. Bumped up the spooky factor with some fun new products, friendly jack-o'-lanterns, A2 Cauldron of bats, and Happy Halloween word die. This slimline card features an Eclipse technique and a whole lot of simple masking, so let's get started. I have my design laid out and I'm going to be referring to some ink swatches that I made using Picket Studios ink swatching stamp set. The swatches help me select 5 ink colors so that I can create an ombre effect for the friendly jack-o'-lantern stamp. To prepare for the masking, the first thing I did is use the coordinating die to cut some masking paper. The mask is cut apart into the 5 separate pumpkins, and as I do so, I follow the curve of the line between the pumpkins. The pumpkin at the bottom of the stack was inked with the darkest ink, and I just work my way up to my lightest one. And before you do the stamping, make sure that you remove the masks or you'll be starting again like I did. For the lighter inks, I did have to stamp the pumpkin twice so that I would get a nice, even, consistent impression. This is a fun and easy process. I loved how this turned out. Each individual pumpkin really stands out when they're stamped in the different colors of ink. To finish up, I use a little bit of Post-it note tape and mask off the stem from the pumpkin. Because the stem is already inked in the light orange, I choose a medium green and stamp it twice to get good coverage. I want my stack of pumpkins to be lit up, but I don't trust my ability to color in some of those very small areas with a Copic marker. So to help me be able to do that, I'm going to re-stamp the entire image with Versamark ink, and then I'm going to emboss it with matte clear embossing powder. As I apply the heat to melt the embossing powder, I'm going to heat both the front and the back of the panel to minimize warping. After I use the coordinating die to cut my stack of pumpkins, I'm going to use a Copic marker Y19 to color in their faces. The embossing adds just a little bit of dimension, and that, in combination with light pressure using the Copic marker, makes it easy to color in the faces of the pumpkins. And now for the background, I'm going to be working on a panel of Bristol Smooth cardstock. Before I start applying the inks, I'm going to mask off the moon with some masking paper. To create an ink blended background, the inks are applied with life-changing blender brushes. I'm going to be starting off with 2 medium tones of blue ink and applying them randomly to the panel. I find I have better control over the pressure that I'm using to apply the ink when I hold the blender brush by its head. Although I want the different colors of ink that I'm using to be blended, I also want there to be variations so that the sky has a more natural feel to it. After the 2 medium blue tones were applied to the entire panel, I'm going to introduce the darkest blue and just put it around the edges. Medium gray is used to blend out the dark blue with the rest of the panel, creating a duskier, spooky feel. And my background is finished up with just a few touches of lilac. And I removed the mask, and I certainly don't want a bright white moon, so I'm going to use Picket Studios' very small blender brushes to apply some ink, creating some wispy clouds across it. I'm starting off with a narrow, life-changing blender brush and just tapping that color on. All of the inks used in the background were used to build up the color intensity on these clouds. And when all the ink is applied, I'm going to switch over to another brush found in this set. A medium gray ink is applied to soften those clouds. I choose a third brush from this fine blender brush assortment and apply a little bit of lilac along one side of the moon. The A2 Cauldron of Bats is positioned over the top half of the panel. I'm just using a little bit of Post-it note tape to hold it in place. I don't have to worry about the stencil slipping because I'm going to be applying the ink one bat at a time. I want those bats to be really black, so I'm using Picket Fence Studios Black Hybrid ink. I work back and forth between the bats, applying several layers of the ink. And when the panel is dried completely, I'm going to be using the Happy Halloween word die in an Eclipse technique. The dies are positioned vertically down one side of the panel. A ruler is used so that I can make some small adjustments to make sure that both dies are going to be aligned. Dies are held in place with a little bit of Post-it note tape as I run them through the die cutter. The card front will be mounted on black cardstock that was cut slightly larger, measuring 3 3/8 by 8 3/8 inches. When I apply the liquid adhesive, I'm making sure that I get little dots of glue between the letters. After the card front is mounted on the panel, it is going to be adhered to a card base measuring 3 1/2 by 8 1/2 inches. I'm going to replace the letters, making sure that the background on the letters matches with the panel. This is referred to as an Eclipse technique. This is most often used to create a subtle effect, but I wanted my sentiment to have a little bit more prominence. Happy Halloween word dies were used to die cut Picket Fence Studios extra wide black foam tape. I do not immediately remove the foam letters from the backing. I find it much easier to get them aligned with the cardstock ones when they are in place. The foam letters leave an impression. This makes it very easy to align the cardstock one to it. To easily release the die cuts from the rest of the foam, I just cut along the top of the word and then they just pop out. The die cut openings on the card front make it very easy to position the letters onto the panel. The process is repeated with the Halloween word. And this section is just a little bit more fun to do because of the bat detail on the background. It's a little bit like completing a jigsaw puzzle. As each letter was popped in, I loved seeing the bats being completed on the background with the rest of the image on the letter. Black foam was also cut using the coordinating die for the friendly jack-o'-lantern stamp. And after the backing paper was removed, the pumpkins were popped onto the card, completing it. This spooky slimline was a fun card to make. When I think of Halloween, carved pumpkins comes to mind. Friendly jack-o'-lanterns is such a sweet set that pairs perfectly with Happy Halloween word die. And the A2 Cauldron of Bats is the perfect finishing touch for this card. Thank you for joining us at Picket Fence Studios, and as always, we appreciate your visit.